झनक झनक झन झंकारितः
अखिल जगति भुलवी आहा
रसिक मनांच्या तारा गीत कहाण्या गीत गुजेही
सांगे अभिनव धारा
ही प्रसारण इंटरनेट रेडिओ ही प्रसारण इंटरनेट रेडिओ.
Hello and welcome to the show Language Professionals. The language industry has always fascinated me and continues to amaze me every single day. I wonder how people go after their language dreams and they are very passionately working very hard to achieve them. The language industry involves a lot of things: languages, language experts, companies, freelancers, software technology, and so on. I'm Lalita Marathe, translator and trainer, here to interview language professionals working in various aspects of this language industry and working in various Indian and foreign languages. And today we have a very special guest, Sandeep Nulkar of BITS. Sandeep has been an active part of the translation and localization industry for over 25 years. He has extensive experience across every aspect of the profession. He is an expert in building and managing teams, conceptualizing and organizing events, publishing agenda, and driving change. He serves on the state government's language committee and an active part of the language technology consultations under the aegis of the Government of India and Federation of India Chambers of Commerce and Industry. He also serves on the advisory board of ELTIS CIFIL, the managing committee of the Alliance Française de Pune, the board of studies of the Ferguson College, and as a former member of jury of Zambekar Literary Translation Awards. Welcome Sandeep to our podcast. We are really lucky to start this season with you. Welcome Sandeep to our interview series. Association of Language Professionals wishes to interview people who have been contributing to this industry and are still contributing. And we wish to seek information and knowledge from you so that the people in general, the audience in general, and also the linguists benefit from it. So I would like to start by asking you why you chose this language French and why not anything else?
I think actually this was a fairly simple decision. It was more by chance than by anything else. That was something that came first on the list. Between French and German, F comes first, so French came first. For some reason I also had these associations with France which I didn't have with German. The associations were very simple, something to do with fashion, something to do with food, which comes to you through a lot of medium such as television, print magazines, but there were no such images about German. So although French and German were one below the other, it looked like for a child it looked like a very easy thing to pick. So there was no great thought that really went into it. It was just what pleases me more seems like French because there's so much of coolness associated with the language, be it the fashion, be it all the fancy foods that they eat. So it was just probably that, nothing really great. Yeah.
Okay. And did you face any hurdles while learning this language? And how did you overcome them?
So hurdles as such probably were the regular ones. It's not like I was a very gifted student and topped my class across all batches. There was nothing like that happening. So I wasn't below average either. I wasn't very exceptional either. Normal hurdles, normal problems that people face. Initially felt shy to actually speak in a language that was not my own in a room full of people. So you end up keeping quiet more than you end up talking. Back in the day, the communicative approach probably was not that prevalent. So to an extent, we also did a lot more of grammar than actually talking. And which meant that when in 1990 I went to France for the first time, I realized that I could understand practically everything, but I couldn't speak at all. And that was very demoralizing. But that entire trip was really where everything flipped, because in about 14 days I could actually speak fluently, because everything was inside my brain, it just hadn't come out because there wasn't enough practice. The moment there was that linguistic and cultural immersion and the language was forced on me, because even today French people don't speak much English, although they now are increasingly open to speaking in English. Back then, people were actually rude to you if you did not speak French. So there was no chance that anyone would ever speak to me in any other language. So that, I think, just got the language out, and thereafter it was fairly easy, because then the confidence came into place and you knew that, okay, you have learned something, you can use it because you can speak it, and then there was no looking back after that.
Right. So you are stressing on the speaking ability of any language.
Correct.
So while learning it, you have to speak it properly.
I think when you start learning a language, it's very, very important, and especially in today's day and age when there is so much exposure, people can practically do whatever they want as far as one language is concerned. So linguistic and cultural immersion on a daily basis, to whatever extent that you can manage, I think is mandatory when it comes to learning any language. Linguistic immersion and cultural immersion could include things like just simply speaking that language to your friends. Maybe it's just because you're in that same class, or because you have friends who don't mind speaking once in a while, couple of sentences here and there. You don't have to conduct entire conversations. But even if you're speaking to friends and they know French, you know French or any other language, just replacing one sentence with a sentence in French gradually will give you that confidence that you can speak.
Right.
Apart from that, as much as you can make use of all online mediums, films, songs, they are great ways of remembering grammar without actually having to look at it as grammar. I have learned more German from German songs than I have actually learned from a whole lot of other classroom situations.
Right.
Because if, for example, you say "Komm, steig ein," I remember that it's whatever it is as a package because of the song that I learned. But if I had started learning that as a part of studying, then probably it would have become much more difficult to retain. And today you have a plethora of options, right from sitcoms and serials and web series, songs, YouTube channels. There is just endless content. So I think cultural and linguistic immersion on a daily basis is what I think is very important.
Sandeep, you have completed Masters in Management plus a degree in French. I'm sure you must have had various options. So why did you choose to become an entrepreneur?
So becoming an entrepreneur was not really a choice. It's something that came very naturally to me, I think, and it happened at a much earlier time in life, when I was probably in the 7th or 8th standard. Back in those days, Pune used to be a very different kind of a city. Parents were not as obsessed about their children as they are today. They actually let you roam free, and we used to just go from one place to the other on our own. No one really came to drop us and pick us up. So as kids, you also kind of tend to wander and explore your own area. So I was walking somewhere on Jangli Maharaj Road. I don't know where I was going, but I saw this gentleman who was selling bags and purses, rather, ladies' purses. And for a 7th, 8th standard child, I found those colors and everything very attractive, because men normally don't have such fancy, good-looking stuff. So I just found that attractive. I stopped there. And that's for the first time, without any reason, without probably any known reason. I just thought, okay, if this bag costs, and I think one purse costed something like 20-25 rupees at that time. I said, okay, why can I not buy it from him and sell it for something more?
Okay.
And I came back home. I told my mom that I saw this and I think I want to buy those purses and sell it to some people who can buy it for more than that, so I'll earn profit. And she could have actually said, are you crazy? Just focus on your studies, and you're a student, you should better be doing that rather than doing something else. She actually said, let's see. And she came with me, we went there, we actually bought 10 purses. And we then sold them to, of course, all the usual suspects, your uncles and aunts, and they actually made me feel like I was selling, but I wasn't selling. They were buying because of the relation they had with us. But for a child, the feeling was I sold. And because I sold, I think I am a person who has these abilities, is what probably I believed back then. I made some little money. More than the money, I think it just gave me a direction. I just fell in love with the whole idea of selling and earning money. Probably not coming from an extremely well-to-do family, as in we were not poor, but obviously back then a lot of people were really, in the real sense of the term, very middle class, not even upper middle class. So I think money was important somewhere, and these two things just came together. And thereafter I've just sold all my life. I've never done a job in my life, so I don't know what it is to do a job. So I've always worked.
Right,
And yeah, so this started actually way back in 1983-84, and then I started selling crackers when I went to the 9th standard and 10th standard. That continued almost in my college days. Then I was one of the first people to actually start teaching, and I had said this to Darshana, who runs her own German academy. I was actually the first person who started teaching in the typical classes that you know them today. Like you had PISO classes, you have Behre classes. Right. These were traditionally commerce and science classes. And I was the one who actually approached Professor Zog and asked him if I can teach French here, because I had kind of understood that I can use whatever I know to earn money out of it, and I don't need to do a job. So that's how I think the entrepreneurship bug caught on. So before, and of course that PISO thing never materialized, but Professor Behre actually liked my idea, and that was the first time in Pune that actually French and German was taken up by such classes. Otherwise it was just some teacher who used to probably conduct these classes on a very personal level, but no major prime time classes actually entertained foreign languages, because according to them there was no market for that.
And when did you decide to start your own company, BITS?
So that again was not a decision, it was a logical conclusion to a process. For that I will just take you a little back and tell you probably how I became a translator, because that also was not a plan. So the whole idea was to take up arts, because I never thought, looking at my own intelligence in school, that I could even remotely succeed at science or any other serious subject, so to say. So that itself was, I can't probably manage this, so let me try and do that. And while I was filling out that form, I said, okay, why not French? So I learned French. And back then, people were pretty much on their own. Like I said, parents didn't mollycoddle you so much. So all problems you solved on your own, everything you did on your own. So whenever, and what also helped is, back then there were not too many brands of two-wheelers. Most of us had one two-wheeler. It was either Bajaj or Kawasaki or something. And most of us had a Bajaj two-wheeler. So I had a Bajaj motorcycle. And whenever that broke down, I took it to a mechanic and then sat there, because we had nothing to do, no phones, nothing. And because things were not so formal, if you were sitting there, the guy usually used to tell you, why are you sitting there doing nothing? Come on, help me out. So we used to help them out. And we used to find it fun, because you just got to learn a lot of things about the two-wheeler. So all this was happening in the background without a plan. So I go to a college, I pick French for lack of a better choice. I'm helping someone repair my own two-wheeler for lack of a choice. And then after that, it so happened that Dr. Manmohan Singh came out with this new policy. The market started opening, and suddenly export and import, as it was called back then, became the new thing to do. And I said, okay, this makes sense. Let me couple my knowledge of French with some kind of a degree in export and import, and let's see what I can do out of it. I gave that entrance exam, I cleared the entrance exam, I got into what today is SIIB, which is Symbiosis Institute of International Business. And when they said that as part completion of the course, you have to do an internship. I asked my uncle, who was a senior manager in the export department in Bajaj back then, and he said, of course you can come and do your internship here. The moment I went there, I realized that I somehow seem to have got it right by some stroke of luck, because they were actually very, very keen to have someone there to help them out with the entire African countries that speak French.
Oh.
And the moment I stepped in, no one ever made me do any single job related to export or import. I was only used for my French skills.
Oh, wow.
That it was Bajaj, that I had a very deep understanding of every single two-wheeler of Bajaj. I had practically half serviced most two-wheelers myself. Meant that I had the domain knowledge, I had the language,
Right.
and I had the communication skills. So it just all came together one day without me having really planned. So the answer to a lot of questions is really, it just happened. It was a natural progression. Starting a company was not the plan, because my internship ended. I was not working for them free anymore, but they wanted me to work for them. So they said, okay, then how do we pay you? So I said, okay, you pay me, and then they used to pay me into my own account. Then eventually that one language requirement converted into many more languages.
Okay.
And then I said, now I can't do this all by myself. So I had to bring people in. Once they came in, having a proprietorship concern didn't make sense, which is why we just gave it a name to begin with before we changed the legal nature or form of the company. So that's how really the company came about, just as a natural progression.
Fantastic. So, Sandeep, can you explain to us what exactly is an LSP, the language service providers or a translation agency?
So I have kind of had a problem with the nomenclature that is used in the industry for a long time. I personally don't like the term translation agency, because when anyone calls anyone, including themselves, a translation agency, I think we are really not doing justice to what the company is supposed to do. As opposed to that, if you call it a language service provider, that's exactly what you are. You are a provider of language services, which need not stay restricted to translations. It can go well beyond translations and include anything and everything that has a language element in it. The other part is there is also some people have this term MLVs, multilingual or multi-language providers or something like that. It's more used in the West than in India, but pretty much the same things, LSP or MLV. What is essentially called a translation agency or a translation company. Normally, when I have seen there being problems between freelancers and companies, it's usually between freelancers and translation agencies, because agencies just act like forwarders, where they just kind of source something from somewhere and then forward it. Whereas if you're a serious translation company or a language service provider, you're actually supposed to add value at every stage of the chain. And that, of course, is the expectation. The nomenclature doesn't change anything. But I just think that calling something by the right name already puts a certain amount of responsibility on them.
Absolutely. So there has to be value addition.
So agencies look to me more like traders. But language service providers look to me more like what it should be. I would still go with the nomenclature language solution providers, because if you're providing a solution, then you're actually adding a lot of value, because without adding value, you can't just assimilate all services and then just forward them. You have to make sure that whatever you're doing is finally providing a solution to some problem.
The market trend in languages has been changing, and it is continuously changing, and at a very rapid pace. So can you tell us why these changes are happening?
So obviously any market normally would go through a lot of dynamic changes over a period of time. That our country is so linguistically diverse, the change was always kind of around the corner, but it wasn't happening. Primarily because of technology and how technology had still not scaled to a level that it needs to scale before the scale is tipped, and the language then takes a lot of precedence over a whole lot of things. That I think happened with Jio. Now we all know that practically every Indian has extremely cheap internet connections and a very cheap smartphone in their hand, with so many people coming online and faced with another stark reality that probably 90% of them do not even speak English as their first, second, or even third language. The push from the industry was only a long time coming. So I think this was about time that this happened. Now there's a pressing need to actually address those 829 million people who are going to be online by 2021. And most of these, a Google report suggests that over 75% of these are going to actually prefer browsing online. And when you say browsing, finally the end point is that you either acquire information or you acquire a product or a service. More than 75% people need to be addressed in their own language. And so I think the industry changed and flipped to what it currently looks like to me, which I would imagine the market for Indian languages services to be way higher and way more lucrative than that for foreign languages. It doesn't probably mean that the foreign language component will completely go away, but we also cannot neglect the fact that machine translation has made giant strides in terms of quality, especially when it comes to European languages, which was essentially India's idea of a foreign language market. It was essentially restricted to European languages. Exceptions were Russian at a certain point in time, can still be Japanese today. But these are exceptions. If you're talking about a majority of the work coming in, it was always Western languages. And those are the languages where machine translations have made giant strides, which means that our own workforce in these language pairs need to be better than machine translations, which is increasingly not happening. So there are very few people who are really going to stay relevant in today's world when foreign languages are talked about. As far as Indian languages are concerned, I think the sky is the limit. We are talking about nothing less than 20 or 30 trillion words on the internet. Not even 1% of that volume is currently available in Indian languages. And even if we take 1% of 20-30 trillion words that need to be translated into any of the Indian languages or all of the official Indian languages, we are still looking at some billion words per language that need to be translated. So that, I think, is the scale and scope for the industry.
For the Indian languages.
For the Indian languages part.
Like you mentioned just now, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, machine translation, and the way it has changed the language. I mean, for good or for bad, we don't know. Can you just elaborate it a little bit?
I think artificial intelligence is a word that is very incorrectly associated with machine translation. I really don't see, after having spoken to numerous people who really understand how this works, how artificial intelligence can really be even used in this context. I think the more appropriate thing to talk about is machine learning. And I kind of have realized that technical people actually are of the opinion that if some language person actually brings up the AI angle in the language component, they actually have no clue what they are saying. If they're talking machine learning, that's a very legitimate thing. Machine learning is the base of machine translations. So I think machine learning is here to stay. There's a lot of work that's happening in that space. Google is one of the pioneers. Obviously, there are so many more machine translation engines that are working on different algorithms to get it right in their own way. And this is something that going forward is going to actually change the way we look at the translation industry, because I've said that on numerous platforms, and I can't stress enough how the translator as we knew it earlier is actually dead long ago. The translator of yesterday is the post editor of today, and to be a post editor today, you need to know better than what machines are doing. You need to see through what machines are doing and be able to improve on machine output very quickly.
Okay.
So the productivity is increasing and it needs to increase further.
So to achieve all this, I mean, to keep up with the new pace, new technology, the linguist has to be very good in his or her own language. And the mother tongue also, and whatever foreign language or other language he has learned.
So since you talked about being good in both languages, what we have noticed over the past few months that we have been working with machine translation and post editing. And especially when it comes to Indian language translators, the real work that needs to be done and the effort that needs to be taken by Indian language translators who aspire to be part of the market is to ensure that their English is in place in terms of understanding idioms, phrases, very specific constructions specific to English, because that is where people seem to not understand things, and that is where machine translations also do not really serve the purpose, so no one's getting it. So if people really want to stay relevant, the understanding of English of an average translator or an average language professional isn't bad, but it really needs to be spot on when it comes to idioms, phrases, and specific constructions for English in English.
Varnac is India's first crowdsourced translation solution. Can you please explain what exactly is crowdsourcing and how does it work?
So very quickly to connect what you're asking me right now with what I said earlier, we are looking at many billion words that need to be translated, and pretty quickly, because 2021 is not far away, and although there's no deadline as such, words can continue to be translated over a period of time. The gist of it, what I'm trying to say is that there is a huge amount of content that needs to be translated quick, cheap, and really of a decent quality. Now, how do you achieve that with an existing workforce which is non-existent? Very recently, I just checked online, Prose being the most popular online platform for translation services. If I just filter English to Hindi and India, I don't even find 2000 translators there. The number is way lower. If I go to something like Santhali, there are not even 5 translators. And Santhali is still a legitimate official Indian language, and the government of India cannot not translate anything in any other language, in any language that is an official language. So if it's an official language and if the government is doing something, they have to do it for all 22 languages. Where do they find people for all these languages? Are the 2000 odd people that you will find everywhere, maybe there might be 5000. Is 5000 a sufficient number for a language like Hindi, where there could very easily be 100 billion words that need to be translated? How long will 100 billion words take for a few thousand people to translate? And do we have that kind of time, given that information becomes stale overnight? So if you look at the speed and the scale at which this needs to be done, I think for a country like India, crowdsourcing is actually the only way you can achieve anything. Now, our idea of crowdsourcing, there could be various definitions what crowdsourcing is, and I think the simplest understanding of crowdsourcing is anything that you source from a crowd, which is a group of people. So instead of a few people doing something, you have probably a few thousand people doing something. Now, how do you apply that to translations? You apply that to translations by saying that, and this is where our starting point was. I was thinking to myself that if I look at a typical Indian, an educated Indian, who is probably doing a fancy job, is intelligent enough to solve a crossword, is intelligent enough to read some nice English book, or is also keen to, solve something like a Sudoku. So the person has brains, the person has education, the person probably even has domain knowledge, but the person doesn't think of himself as a translator. Can I use technology to make this person a contributor in the supply chain? And technology actually had an answer for that, where we used technology to micro distribute translations to anyone sitting in any corner of India. And no one really needs to really think of themselves as translators. If you can solve a crossword, if you can solve a Sudoku, you can translate. I'm not even expecting you to translate. We machine translate and give you a segment, and it's just one segment. And that one segment you just correct to whatever your ability and belief is and send it back. We have realized that we were able to increase the scale by 50%. 50 times. So typically a translator takes about an entire day, 7 and 8 hours of work to translate 2000 words if they do not use machine translations. And if they use machine translations, they can probably do it in half the time. What we realized was if we micro distribute this, where everyone is translating no more or checking, editing no more than one segment, we are able to process a file of 2000 words in under 15 minutes.
Oh, really? Okay.
So the speed went up, the scale went up, because now in 15 minutes, if I can, even in 20 minutes, if I can translate 2000 with X number of post editors, with 10x the post editors, in 24 hours, I can translate unimaginable number of words. The question arises, are these people capable? The answer is no, they are not capable. Are they better than Google Translate? The answer is no, they are not better than Google Translate. So then how do you still make them relevant? So we actually bring in our expertise in the language industry to design programs for them which are built into the app, which improve their ability to post edit. So they are being trained. At the same time, we are also sourcing and handpicking reviewers who are going to actually come in and check what the post editors have done. So we have a layered system. So this is essentially what crowdsourcing means to us, and this is how we are doing it.
That is like an end-to-end solution.
Yeah, it comes with it's a tiered service. So people can buy just translation plus post editing. If they want a little better quality, they can pay for translation plus post editing plus one round of review. If they want even better quality, they can go in for 2 reviews, and if they want even better quality, then they can go in for human translations.
You can keep on refining it.
Yeah.
As per the client's wish. That's wonderful.
Yeah. As per their budget, actually.
As per their budget.
Yeah.
Okay. Sandeep, there is a lot of confusion right now about the changing scenario of the language industry, especially for the translators. So, can you tell us more about the emerging trends in the language industry with reference to translators? I can see that translators are becoming post editors, but the translators are taking time to accept it and digest it. So, what are your thoughts about it?
So, I'm going to be very honest and say that anyone who finds it difficult to accept the change around them is not so much of a professional. You cannot probably have doctors say that today. If there is laser technology to do an operation, you cannot say, I am going to live in the past and not really embrace that. Or I am not yet convinced about the effectiveness of laser technology. I think the same applies to any professional, and thereby even translators.
Okay.
Translators in India, in my judgment and unfortunately, are rarely people who have taken a huge amount of effort in their own domain. If I ask any basic question relating to a whole lot of things to any people that I have met, I have rarely got a very confident answer. I have a very different experience when I speak to doctors and lawyers and chartered accountants. If I ask someone about what is the current taxation policy, every CA who is worth his salt will be able to answer that question. And you can try this. I'm not joking. You can try this. You can put out a question to everyone you meet and ask them the difference between translation and localization and see how many can actually impress you with their answer. Those are the people I'm really addressing. I'm not addressing people who are not even aware of this basic difference. And I have heard very, very, very juvenile answers like translation is when you translate a document and localization is when you localize to the local taste or adapt it to the local market. It just sounds nice to someone who has no understanding of anything, but it makes no sense. A translator is supposed to do that in any case. So then how is localization different from translation? So I think, I don't know about the confusion. If you're talking about serious players, they will know their stuff right, and that's what is expected. If you ask about the trends, I can answer this very briefly and very quickly. The writing is on the wall. If you are a language professional, first of all, stop calling yourself a translator and limiting your scope. If you are a language professional in India today, you are living in a golden era. You better know everything that it takes to make the most of the market and the opportunities that it holds out today. And what all are the things that you really need to know and be able to do. Fortunately, not too many. First of all, you have to be able to translate well and quickly including the typing and everything into your own mother tongue, whatever your mother tongue is. Trust me, even if your mother tongue is something that people have not heard about, not today but tomorrow there will be an opportunity even in those languages that people don't even know exist in India. If that is the first step, the second step is to be able to also add another skill to this, which could be something as simple as a voiceover. There was a theme or the topic in the recently concluded Bhashantar event in Delhi, where the theme was voice video vernacular.
Okay.
That is the future of India.
Okay.
Voice, video and vernacular.
Okay.
So a language professional today has to be able to work with his own mother tongue and in a way that they can translate, post-edit, review, provide a voiceover, create a video out of whatever requirement their clients might have with a Indian language or their mother tongue angle coming into the picture. So they should be able to have these skills in them. Apart from that, I think something like publishing, desktop publishing to the web are abilities that translators or language professionals today must have. So even if you are covered on these 3 or 4 accounts, I think you're very, very good to go for now.
Right. So, like you said, a translator is not a translator only, also a language professional having various skills.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think you have a very apt name for Association of Language Professionals.
Oh, thank you. Yes. My next question was actually about localization. And since you mentioned it already, can you elaborate it? Like, can you tell us the difference and what exactly is it?
So, there are 2 levels of understanding about localization. One is a language side of localization, one is the technical side of localization. The language side of localization includes stuff that typically good translators are doing already and translators are supposed to do already. Mm-hmm. So if there is a sentence in a language that you're translating into some other language, but culturally there are elements in that sentence that do not exist in the target language, then you're supposed to adapt it, not translate it word for word, but actually translate the sense, translate the meaning and not the words. That is the simplest and the most rudimentary understanding of localization, which unfortunately will not suffice in today's day and age. The technical understanding of localization again probably will have a couple of components. The most primary one and the most rudimentary one is your date and time formats that need to be localized. So for example, the metric system used by the French is a comma, most Europeans. So what we call point, they will say comma. So if I am saying I am 60.08% marks I have got, so I will say 60.08, they will say 60.08. Now these are, or date time, you have a different time and date format in the US and in the UK and probably in some other countries. So all of that is taken care of by the machine, not the translators. So the moment you switch the language of any kind of an application, a mobile application or a web application, from say US English to UK English, these changes will happen automatically within the system because the system has been localized. The other aspect of localization is also where an element of internationalization comes into the picture, and internationalization is probably something to do with the code rather than with anything else. So you imagine a system that has a code that has not been internationalized will not be able to support localization in say Arabic because it was never programmed, never coded in a way that it will take text from right to left. Now, if you're building an application for the future, your application needs to have a code that has been internationalized. An internationalized code will further take the localization of the application into any number of languages because it has been internationalized. So it already is ready to receive any language. And then you go through the technical part of localization, and we honestly do not even talk about localization in a translation sense because that is taken for granted. That's part of translation.
That's part of it.
Anyone saying that we are into translation and localization has no clue what they are saying, because if I ask them, can they internationalize the code for me? And if the answer is no, then they better not claim something like that. If I ask them, will you actually be able to go down to the software architecture level, change the code, change the UI for me? If the answer is no, they really don't have any business claiming that they're into localization.
Sandeep, what would you advise a linguist or a language professional who is pursuing foreign or Indian languages, either as a passion or as a career?
So the first advice is to take themselves and their profession a lot more seriously than they currently are. I don't think the best of us are still literate enough, in a sense that we have to understand that language, when you're a teacher, you're actually working with languages. But when you're working as a language professional today, you're not really working with languages. You're working with every possible domain. And you cannot not understand these domains. You cannot not understand technology in a fairly deep sense. You can't be very superficial as far as knowledge is concerned. And I think I am someone myself who has learned it the hard way, in the sense I don't think I knew most of the things I know today 10 years ago. But the starting point was that probably I'd know nothing. Probably I don't know enough, and I need to understand other domains way better than I currently understand them, and which is how the entire process starts. So I think I don't know how I can put this without really sounding very wrong, but translators or even language professionals aren't doing a lot of justice to their own cause by being so clumsy about their own careers. I would want language professionals to take the same amount of pride in their profession as anyone else does, as a lawyer does, as a doctor does. And again, I can give you a test and you can conduct that test on people you meet. Ask them how many states, how many union territories, and how many official Indian languages does our country have. I can bet that 50% of them will get it wrong. If you can't even name the number and the languages that are official in India, what is the starting point? It's that bad. I have done this exercise in so many classes that I have been a part of for foreign languages. Foreign language professionals can't even in one breath name 15 to 20 foreign languages. They can go at a speed till 5 or 6. The speed reduces to a little 50-20% up to 10, and after 10 there are long pauses. They start thinking. It's not that difficult, but if you are a language professional, how much do you know about your own country, about the world, about the industries that are the reason why you're working? I think that basic level of awareness and intelligence, when you speak to a language professional, you should actually come out impressed that, my God, you know so much. And how do you know all this? Because you are not an engineer, you are not a doctor, you are not anything, but how the hell do you know so much? So the moment you have, and it doesn't take time, it took me a lot of time, because the realization happened over a period of time. It happened over a period of time where internet also was not as accessible as it is today. But I don't think, if you actually decide that this is very serious stuff and I need to know my stuff really well, if I claim to be a language professional, I really need to be able to impress people with my knowledge of their industry, then I think it will not take you more than a month. And after a month, you have got all the basics covered, and thereafter it's a continuous journey. You just continue to read and you stay updated. That's it. You have to have an opinion on everything. I don't even say that it has to be the right opinion. I'm not even saying you have a non-studied opinion. You should have some opinion on anything. If someone asks you, how do you think the rising inflation is going to affect the translation industry? That's not an answer you expect from a professional. You have to be able to correlate that to the GDP, to how it affects the industry and how the industry affects your own prospects. If you don't see that connection, you're not so much of a language professional. You're wasting your time.
So, what are the future projects in your mind for BITS and Varnak?
So, as silly as it might sound, I have never had plans. I still don't have a plan. Okay. Once someone was actually surprised. He said, "You are the CEO of BITS and you don't have a plan." I said, "No, I don't have a plan. I just have one plan, which is to focus on what we are doing right now, to scale that. I don't look beyond that. I don't know what I'm going to do in 6 months or 1 year. I just know that we need to get way better at every single thing that we are doing today, because at the end of the day, whether you offer the right price or you don't offer the right price, whether you offer the right scale or you don't offer the right scale, it won't matter as much as if you don't offer the right quality. After having sustained in business for the last 29 years, I can't stress enough that it is only because of the level of quality that we have provided. Now again, that's a cliched term. You will meet practically everyone who will choose to speak to you like they are the ones who are providing quality, and it's the world that doesn't provide quality. But if you take a very bird's eye view of our industry, barely 5% of our industry actually is a quality service provider. So there are 95% people who are actually giving our industry a bad name. And that actually starts with something as little as not knowing enough about the other industry that you work for. So it starts there, but yeah, so no plans really. The only plan is like a very immediate plan, which is to get Vernac right, to get it really where I think it deserves to be. I think Vernac can be a great integrator in terms of bringing people and technology face to face. We can help people access information in a language that they understand and they are comfortable with. We can do it by using the power of people. We can do that by actually bringing down costs, by improving scale, and in the truest sense, disrupting the market that has never been disrupted until now, not even in the West. Even your CAT tool technology, your machine translations might not have disrupted the market as much as the Indian market that potentially can be disrupted by concept as crowdsourcing. That's the immediate plan, and that's the only plan.
You have authored 2 books, Shabda Shabda and Know Your Words Worth. So how did these books happen?
So between the year 2000 and between the years 2000 and 2010, for nearly 10 years, I used to be approached by a minimum of 5 to 6 people every week who insisted I give them time and explain to them how they could make a career in languages. And as fun as it was for the first couple of years, it started getting to me after that, because I realized that I was saying exactly the same thing to everyone, and it was counterproductive. It was actually draining me. I couldn't say no to people. I still can't say no to much, but I realized that it's not even helping them probably. So I just, in some fit of rage, I just said to myself that it's probably better I just write down all this, make them sit here, read what I have written, and say, after you have read and understood this, you ask me questions and I will answer only those questions that come out of reading the book. So actually it was that frustration that really made me think of a book. And I happened to meet a friend of mine who runs one of Pune's or Maharashtra's very old publications, and she said, actually this is not a bad idea, you should consider writing a book. And till then I had never even thought of something like that. And I said, maybe she's joking. She said, no, I'm not joking, you should, there will be a market for this. And that's how the first book happened. When the first book happened, Sakar actually reviewed that book. To review that book, the editor of Sakar, Mr. Arun Kalle, he had to read the book so that he could review the book. So he read the book and reviewed the book, and then he approached me saying that I absolutely loved the way you write, and it's exactly what we have in mind for the new look Saptahik Sakar that we plan to come out with. There used to be this very senior and respected professor, N.D. Apte, who used to write a column on English in Saptahik Sakar for many years. Even I have never really read any articles on English coming from a convent school, but for some reason I also knew about this gentleman. He was that popular. And he said, you have really big shoes to step in, because he has a base and he has an established reader base. So will you be able to do that? I said, I can do it in my way. I can't do it the way he does it. So we decided that, because my attention span is very low, I decided that probably today's generation also has a lower attention span. So we, instead of writing one big heavy article, I divided that into 7 or 8 subparts, and that spoke about various aspects of the language in a very fun and light way. within a couple of months, the feature became a huge hit, and they wanted me to write more and more frequently. So that happened. I've been writing for Saptahik Sakar for 10 years now, and I still remember what Mr. Arun Kalli told me back then. He said, mark my words, people will know you because of this feature. And although it's just in a very limited sphere, because it is a circulation of about 75,000 or 1 lakh, and predominantly read by Maharashtrians in Maharashtra, and so basically just the Marathi audience that doesn't know English so much, but I get letters from n number of places within Maharashtra. I travel within Maharashtra. People, when they come to know my name, they say, okay, do you write that article? So people are reading. There is a lot of feedback. And what they probably thought that, the column is so popular, so they wanted to convert that into a book. But then I said, you don't just come out with a compilation. I have written every single subsection of the column with some thought in mind. So let me connect the dots. Let me tell people how they can use this to actually improve their English. So rather than just being a compilation, the book that they came out with was also actually connecting the dots. I kind of made it into a book that tells people how they can use this column to actually improve their English. So that's how those books came about.
So do you wish to venture out as a writer in future?
So currently I won't really name anyone as of now, but one of India's top 3 publishers have shown willingness to publish a book on Indian English, which is going to be a fun book. A very, very prominent film personality has shown interest in converting that into a web series. I'm also working on another book, co-authoring it with a colleague of mine, Alifia, for Indian languages. It is time to kind of at least come out, or at least start writing that in this year, which is the year of indigenous languages globally. And I'm also currently working on my first fiction novel in English, which is to do with patriarchy. So,
nice.
Yeah. So 3 projects happening right now.
That's great.
Yeah.
So Sandeep, I see that you are involved in a lot of activities with FICCI Illia, and so can you explain, what are the activities and how are you involved?
So what happened was, with the new government, the government has a very clear-cut defined policy around language and language technology. FICCI being the industry's premier body, FICCI has a mandate to actually carry out the vision, or actually take forward the vision of the government and implement a lot of activities, do a lot of activities that will basically integrate all interests within the language and language technology industry. So with that objective, probably a couple of years ago, FICCI started focusing on language related activities, because a lot of push for that also came from internal FICCI members, where they said that we are going to need more work to be done as far as Indian languages are concerned, because we clearly see that there is a great need right now for us to be able to address that audience. That's how really FICCI and FICCI Illia came into being. And I think FICCI Illia is doing incredible amount of work in terms of integrating the language and language technology industry. More than 400 members are now part of the Illia, which is basically the Indian Language Internet Alliance. They are doing a lot of work with academicians, with technology partners, with communities, with language service providers, with freelancers. And the whole idea is to bring all of them on one platform to understand the very unique issues that every stakeholder faces, and to find solutions that help people come up with better and more solutions that would eventually lead to every Indian being able to access information in their own language. So it's a very, very focused policy, and a lot of work is going into that currently. I'm currently involved with FICCI Illia as their senior member. So in that role, I usually would be someone who would represent FICCI India's interests within the community, help build partnerships, and pretty much help around with anything that they need in terms of carrying forward the vision.
That's wonderful. So thank you so much, Sandeep, for this information, and I'm sure the linguists will definitely benefit from whatever you have shared with us. And all the best to all your ventures.
Thank you so much.
झनक झनक झन झंकारिता
अखिल जगती भुलवी आहा हा
रसिक मनांच्या तारा गीत कहाण्या हित गुजे